What happened next in this auto workshop will shock you to your core. A homeless-looking old man walked in asking for just one meal in exchange for fixing a car that had stumped every mechanic in the city. They laughed at him. They mocked his trembling hands. But what they discovered about his true identity would haunt them forever. This is a story that will change how you see people around you. Stay till the end because the twist will leave you speechless. The rain hammered against the grimy windows of Martinez Auto Workshop like bullets against armor. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting dancing shadows across tools scattered like forgotten dreams. The smell of motor oil and burning rubber filled the air so thick you could taste the desperation. It was 3 p.m. on what locals would later call the day everything changed. The workshop buzzed with the usual chaos. Young mechanics cursing at stubborn bolts, pneumatic tools screaming their mechanical songs, and the constant din of engines refusing to cooperate. Then, the door creaked open with a sound that somehow cut through all the noise. Every head turned toward the entrance. There, silhouetted against the stormy afternoon, stood a figure that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. His clothes hung on his thin frame like flags of surrender. Patched jacket with holes that spoke of countless cold nights, work boots held together more by hope than leather, and pants that had seen better decades. The old man's face was a roadmap of life's hardest journeys. Deep lines carved by years of struggle, eyes that had seen both triumph and devastating defeat, and hands, oh, those hands, scarred and calloused, bearing the permanent stains of motor oil that no amount of scrubbing could ever remove. "Look what the storm washed in," shouted Tommy, the loudest and youngest of the crew, barely 22 and full of the kind of arrogance that only comes from never having truly failed at anything important. The other mechanics, Carlos, Miguel, and Roberto, joined in with snickers that echoed off the concrete walls. The old man shuffled forward, each step deliberate and measured. His wooden cane tapped against the floor in a rhythm that somehow commanded more respect than their laughter deserved. "Excuse me." His voice was soft, but carried the authority of mountains. "I noticed the Mercedes outside with smoke coming from the engine. Could I possibly fix it in exchange for just a warm meal?" The workshop exploded with laughter so cruel it could have shattered glass. "You? Fix a Mercedes-Benz S-Class?" Tommy wiped tears of laughter from his eyes. "Old man, that car is worth more than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. We've been working on it for 3 days, and even we can't figure it out." The Mercedes sat in the center of the workshop like a wounded beast, a gleaming silver S-Class that belonged to the mayor's wife. Smoke continued to rise from its engine bay in lazy, accusatory spirals. The car had been the workshop's biggest challenge and their greatest shame. "Those hands are shaking so bad, you probably can't even hold a wrench," Carlos added, pointing at the old man's trembling fingers, not realizing that the tremor came not from weakness, but from the effort of containing decades of suppressed expertise. The old man straightened his bent shoulders just slightly. "My name is Don Ernesto," he said with quiet dignity, "and I'm asking for nothing more than a chance and a warm meal." Roberto, the shop foreman, stepped forward with a grin that would have made the devil proud. "Tell you what, old-timer, we'll make this interesting. You fix that Mercedes, and I mean fix it properly, not some bandage job, and we'll not only give you a meal, we'll give you the best dinner this side of the city. But when you fail, and you will fail, you leave this workshop and you never, ever come back." Don Ernesto's eyes, pale blue like winter sky, met Roberto's gaze without flinching. "I accept your terms." What happened next would be talked about in that neighborhood for the next 50 years. Don Ernesto approached the Mercedes with the reverence of a priest approaching an altar. His weathered hand traced the hood's elegant lines as if he were reading Braille written by the gods of engineering themselves. "This engine," he said so quietly that the mechanics had to lean in to hear, "is crying for help. But none of you are listening. He opened his small cloth bag and pulled out what appeared to be just an old rag. The mechanics exchanged glances that said, "This old fool thinks he can fix a Mercedes with a piece of cloth." But then Ernesto did something that made their smirks falter. He placed his ear against the engine block and listened. Really listened. For a full minute, he stood there in complete concentration. His eyes closed, his breathing steady, as if he were having a conversation with the machine itself. "The timing is off by 12 degrees, he murmured, not looking up. "The fuel injection system is starved because someone installed the wrong pressure regulator. And there's a hairline crack in the manifold gasket that's letting air in where it doesn't belong." The mechanics stopped laughing. Tommy's mouth actually fell open. Carlos whispered to Miguel, how could he know that just from listening? When Don Ernesto's hands entered the engine bay, something magical happened. The trembling stopped completely. His fingers moved with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker and the confidence of someone who had done this dance 10,000 times before. He worked without modern diagnostic equipment, without computerized tools, without any of the technology the young mechanics relied on. Just his hands, his knowledge, and that old rag. Each movement was purposeful, economical, perfect. He adjusted the timing with nothing but his fingertips and an internal clock that seemed more accurate than atomic time. The workshop had gone completely silent except for the soft clicking of metal on metal as the master worked his craft. "This isn't possible," Roberto whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. He was watching something that challenged everything he thought he knew about automotive repair. The youngest apprentice, a boy named David who rarely spoke, found his voice. "Look at his hands. They're not shaking anymore. They're perfect." For 47 minutes, Don Ernesto worked in complete silence, while 5 young men watched in growing amazement and dawning horror at what they had done. Finally, Ernesto straightened up, wiped his hands on the old rag, and stepped back from the Mercedes. "Turn the key," he said simply. Roberto, his hands actually shaking now, climbed into the driver's seat. The key turned. The engine caught immediately, not with the rough coughing and smoking of before, but with the smooth, powerful purr of German engineering operating exactly as intended. The sound filled the workshop like a choir of angels. No smoke, no hesitation, just pure mechanical perfection. Tommy, who had been the cruelest in his mockery, found himself staring at the old man with something approaching terror. Who are you?" Don Ernesto carefully folded his rag and placed it back in his cloth bag. When he looked up, his eyes held depths that none of them had noticed before. 43 years ago, he began, his voice now carrying the authority that had been hidden beneath humility. "My name was in newspapers across 3 countries. I was the chief mechanic for Formula One racing teams. I worked on engines that cost more than most people's houses." The silence was so complete that they could hear their own hearts beating. "I held world championship trophies above my head. I was flown to Monaco, to Brazil, to Japan, anywhere there were engines that needed the touch of a master. I was Ernesto Vasquez." Miguel's face went white. Even in their small town, that name was legend. Ernesto Vasquez, the magician of motors, the man who could resurrect dead engines, the mechanic who had turned failing race teams into champions. "But you know what I learned?" Ernesto continued. "Glory is beautiful, but it doesn't keep you warm at night. Fame is intoxicating, but it doesn't fill your stomach when the world forgets your name. And the world always forgets. I lost everything. Bad investments, worse friends. The racing world moved on to younger men with newer ideas." Roberto found his voice, barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" "Because I wanted to see what kind of men you truly are. I wanted to know if you would help a fellow human being who needed assistance, or if you would mock someone you perceived as beneath you. You see, engines are like people. They have souls, personalities, voices. When you mock and mistreat them, they rebel. When you approach them with respect and understanding, they sing for you. The same is true for human beings. Carlos, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks, stepped forward. Don Ernesto, we're so sorry. We're so incredibly sorry. Sorry is the first step toward wisdom, Ernesto replied. But it's only the first step. David, the youngest apprentice, dropped to his knees. Master, will you teach us? Not just how to fix cars, but how to be the kind of men who see people instead of just their appearances. Ernesto studied each face with their shattered arrogance, newfound humility, and desperate hope for redemption. Teaching requires two things: a teacher willing to share his knowledge, and students willing to empty themselves of what they think they know to make room for what they need to learn. I don't want your money. I don't want your praise. If you truly want to learn, you'll start from the very beginning. You'll treat every customer, rich or poor, young or old, with the respect you would show your own grandmother. They nodded like children receiving commandments. And most importantly, Ernesto's voice grew firm, you'll remember that mastery isn't about proving you're better than others. It's about becoming better than you were yesterday. Roberto wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. Don Ernesto, let me take you to the finest restaurant in town. But the old master shook his head with a gentle smile. I asked for a meal, not a banquet. The humblest food shared with honest hearts tastes better than caviar eaten in loneliness. They ordered pizza from the corner shop and sat together in the workshop, sharing stories and dreams. As the sun set outside, the workshop that had begun the day echoing with arrogance now resonated with something far more powerful: the sound of men learning to see clearly for the first time. 3 months later, Martinez Auto Workshop had become something entirely different. Word had spread throughout the region that something special was happening there. Don Ernesto never put his name on the building. He simply worked alongside his students, teaching not just the technical skills of automotive repair, but the deeper lessons of humility, respect, and human dignity. The 5 young men who had once mocked him became masters in their own right, each carrying forward the lessons that went far beyond automotive repair. The Mercedes-Benz still runs perfectly, sitting in a place of honor as a reminder that real mastery isn't about impressing others with what you know, but about serving others with what you've learned. And sometimes, late at night, when the last customer has gone home, you can still hear Don Ernesto's voice echoing through the workshop. True greatness isn't in pride, but in respect, dignity, and humility. When you understand this, you understand everything.